All right, it is 6:30, so I think we can get started. Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight at the Center for Politics and the People's first event of the academic year. During the pandemic, we had to move our programming mostly to the world of webinars. But let's be honest, there is nothing that compensates for in-person events where we can see our friends and hopefully only very few foes. I am Henrik Schatzinger, Interim Director of the Center, and I'm also a Professor of Political Science. These events are made truly special because of your attendance and participation. Again, thank you for joining us. To those of you who are with us in person, as well as those of you who will be watching this discussion on the Ripon channel. Welcome to Ripon College and our Center for Politics and the People. Today, we are here to talk about challenges and opportunities in local politics. Specifically, we want to address issues as they relate to economic development, housing, and budgetary difficulties. And we want to see how well current approaches to these issues are working. We will hopefully identify similarities and also some differences among local communities in how issues are approached, who decision makers feel most responsive to, and to what extent office holders feel they have discretion in governing. I am excited, very excited, that we have three distinguished panelists to discuss the role of local politics tonight. Let me introduce them to you. Lori Palmieri is the mayor of Oshkosh. She served 2 terms as a member of the Oshkosh Common Council, and she's in her 2nd term as mayor. She has earned a bachelor's degree in urban and regional studies from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, and she also holds a master's degree in urban planning from UW-Milwaukee. She currently serves as a commissioner for the East Central Regional Planning Commission, is chair of the Oshkosh Redevelopment Authority, council liaison for Parks Advisory Board and the Bike and Pedestrian Committee. She has served on various boards and commissions in the community and Northeast Wisconsin. She is the co-founder of the Middle Village Neighborhood Association and has played a leadership role in creating other neighborhood associations since 2011. Lori Palmieri has been a resident of Oshkosh since 2008. Right next to me here we have Adam Sontag. He is the city administrator of Ripon. He was the city administrator for the city of Hillsborough, Wisconsin from 2011 through 2021. Before he took his current position in Ripon. He has served as a regional director for the Wisconsin City County Management Association, and he has served as a member of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities Lobby, the Monroe, Vernon, Crawford Growth Fund Board, Hillsborough Library Board, and the Hillsborough Lions Club. He majored in history at Ripon College, with minors in English and educational studies. He earned a master's degree in public administration from Minnesota State University, Mankato. And last but not least, certainly, we have to my far left here, Steve Abel, who is chair of the Fond du Lac County Board of Supervisors. He is co-owner of the Abel Dairy Farms in Eden, Wisconsin, a 6th-generation family farm. He has been on the county board for more than 10 years. He has also served on the University of Wisconsin Extension, Education, Ag, and Recreation Committees. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Our plan for tonight is as follows. I will begin by engaging the panelists in a series of questions, and after roughly 30 minutes, we will open up the conversations to questions from you, the audience. So, let's get started. I have three segments, so to speak here, short segments. The first one deals with challenges, the second one with opportunities, and the last one focuses a little bit more on the personal side of politics, some a little bit more of the human side of politics in local politics. So let's start with some of the more difficult stuff, which is challenges. I remember Adam Sontag's talk in City Hall very recently, and he had kind of a famous, some might call it infamous slide in that presentation, where he listed, in fact, a dozen challenges on that slide, and at the bottom it said, "and so much more!" exclamation mark. I don't have to list all of them, even though I kind of put some of them down here. The list was certainly not unique to Ripon or even to Wisconsin, but many local communities face the same or very similar challenges. So my first question, and I will start with you, but then I want to move on to the other panelists here, is, among these challenges, maybe could you identify two that stand out to you and tell us why they stand out in your mind?
Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost. It's good to be back. It's kind of a trip because a couple of my former professors are in the audience, and I at one point was obviously in those chairs learning great things here at Ripon College. To your question, yes, I gave a presentation to the League of Women Voters of Ripon, and you didn't describe it totally. It was a ship called Any City, Wisconsin, heading toward an iceberg with 12 things listed, and the thing and many more. The state of our cities in the state of Wisconsin is at a very unique point right now. I think one of the biggest challenges that every community is facing is just funding. We have been heading toward a financial cliff with state funding and municipal service funding for probably the last 5 years. So ever since Act 10, there were tools put in place and there were mechanisms put in place that helped communities adjust, save money, but then there were also things put in place that restricted municipalities' abilities to do some very important things, like pay for services. At a time where there's rapid inflation and very low growth, in communities with things like levy limit restrictions to net new construction, we see a very hard time paying for the things that fund our programs and our projects in our communities. So I would say funding is probably one of the biggest challenges, and if I didn't say that, the League of Wisconsin Municipalities would probably be very disappointed. And I think from the standpoint of every municipality, that is a big topic. The second challenge, I would say more toward Ripon and taking this role about a year and a half ago, starting in. Something that I dealt with personally even was housing, and that is again a common challenge across the state. I wouldn't say that it's as big of a challenge in bigger areas. You see a lot of housing being built in areas like Madison in the state and those types of communities. But in a more rural area, housing is a challenge. So certainly, that has impacts beyond just someone trying to find a house. That has impacts for economic development, that has impacts to school districts, that has impacts to your employers, to your growth, to everything. So if people aren't moving to your community or can't find a place to move to in your community, you are not growing.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And in fact, I had a question about housing, but of course I will, wait before we might come back to it. Lori, do you have any thoughts on what, in your mind, are the two biggest challenges?
Yes, thank you. I promise we did not consult each other ahead of time, but top of my list, the list of many challenges, is accessible, affordable housing. And I could echo many of Adam's comments, but I will tell you that we in the city of Oshkosh just recently completed a full year housing study to try to get to the specifics as to where the gaps are in terms of stock, in terms of quality, in terms of affordability. My one regret is that one of the criteria that did not make it into the list was accessibility. And when I say accessibility, I am talking about physical and fiscal. So for a significantly aging population in Oshkosh, over 60% of our housing stock was built pre-World War II. And that means raised foundations, that means stairs. Many of the older homes, including my own, had a bathroom only on the upper level. So mobility challenges for our aging population and the ability to age in place, as well as other folks who may have some mobility limitations, affect that physical side of it. The fiscal side of it is, no, we have not kept pace with building. And many of you may have read recent news or in recent years about fewer and fewer of what's called the starter homes being built. And those starter homes, maybe less than 1,500 square feet, affordable, are critical for the filtering of housing throughout the affordability range, right? If we're talking about 30% of income dedicated to housing, that's what we classify as affordable. Of course, you have extremely low income, very low income, moderate, and so on. What we found with our study was we were short significant numbers at the below $25,000 per year income level. So that would be roughly $500 a month affordable units, as well as one might think, middle income, but workforce housing in even the upper income level, we were also short. So what happens then is folks are staying in some of those lower level affordable homes longer than they could potentially filter up. So that prevents that next group. So housing, absolutely number one. That study, we are working on the implementation plan, and some of the things that we are looking at are things like the NeighborWorks partnership, a nonprofit entity for working with us on some of that housing stock, but also conversion on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So conversion of things like attics and garages or units outside the main building. Second challenge being clean, safe drinking water, right? Life-sustaining, clean, safe drinking water. And speaking of economic development, it is huge for us to have clean water for tourism and recreation as well. But from the life-sustaining side of this, we have what are called clear well storage tanks that are over 100-some years old at the edge of our Lake Winnebago, that for a number of years have needed to be replaced because they're below grade, and the DNR requires, so to prevent contamination, that they be built above ground. Now, it just so happens that that project or that treatment plant is right next door to the yacht club. So one can imagine that some of the older homes and some of the folks from that area had concerns, because in order to go above grade and the volume that is needed to sustain that and to do what's called backwash through the filters, and that would require like 34-foot tall, cylindrical looking, and what some are referring to as aesthetically not pleasing industrial storage tanks. So that has been quite the topic this year in terms of challenges. Providing that safe, clean drinking water. but also preserving the shoreline. So that's what I have in terms of the two challenges. Sorry if I went a little over.
Yeah, thanks for those details, Lori. And what would you say, Steve? Housing?
Being county board chair, my perspective is probably going to be a little bit different here than my colleagues because I'm not an administrator. I'm just the representative of the elected county board members. There's 25 of us in Fond du Lac County. My predecessor, Martin Farrell, I have to point out, who's in the stage here, or in the audience. I've been the pleasure of watching him chair meetings for the last 13 years. So I'm trying to hold up my end for you here, but I'll try and keep it simple and say I take most problems or challenges, as you call them, and I put them in two buckets. They're either money, it goes into money, can we afford it, how do we do it, and then the other one's the people bucket. Is it a personal problem? Whether that's a social problem, is that an employment problem? What does that come down to? So, rather than talk specifics, I'd like to, I think for us, funding is always the biggest challenge. So, revenue sharing at the state level needs to get fixed. We need to figure out how to filter more of that money down to the counties and the other municipalities that need to use that money. And the state hasn't been very good at that. They've got some pretty good piles of cash sitting there that they're just not going to give us. Counties in our specific instance, it's had to get creative. We've got a sales tax that we a few years ago was supposed to sunset, and the county board decided that we were going to keep it. We just could not afford not to have it anymore, and that produces about $10 million a year for funding for Fond du Lac County. When that decided to sunset, we decided rather than keep all of that money, we give $1 million a year to the other municipalities, local, towns and villages and cities.
Thank you, by the way.
I wish it was more,
Thank
but we all have needs, right? So, that was something I think Fond du Lac County saw a long time ago when Mercury was going to leave, and to their credit, they were able to keep Mercury, implemented the sales tax, and it's very strange. That sales tax has been growing every year by leaps and bounds. I think it started out, correct me if I'm wrong, I think around $5 million that first year, and we're up to over $10 million in sales tax revenue. So Fond du Lac County is still spending money. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of bring up is the employment issues that we all deal with. I don't care if you're a university or you're a farm or you're a manufacturing facility. We're all short people, and it's hard to attract people because everybody's having those same challenges. So we're simply shuffling people around, and we can talk about economic development, but at some point I think that the conversations needs to shift around to how do we keep people employed and happily employed in our businesses, and not having everybody job jumping all the time, basically. It's easy to, I don't have a solution to that, but I'm just saying that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that people are looking at right now is supply chain issues they all kind of go back to people. I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I did want to actually talk more about housing, but since you guys have covered it quite a bit, I'm going in a different direction, and I'm just going to follow up with Steve's point about money and about maybe the employment issue. I don't know, maybe you have any thoughts about employment and what you call shuffling around people. But let's talk about money just for a moment, because it's an election year. You look at poll numbers and you look at how people are worried about inflation still at very high levels at this point, and it's often covered when people are looking at, when people are when the media discuss it in terms of food and in terms of cars and so on, but there really isn't that much discussion about how inflation also affects cities and communities and their budgets, right? So maybe you have maybe one or two very concrete examples of what does inflation do to your planning, budgetary planning.
That directed at me?
Go ahead, you start.
Okay, so we're in the middle of our budgeting process right now. So inflation is directly seen in county budgets, other government budgets, just like it's seen in business budgets. So we started the budget process with a $4 million shortfall. And then, so basically what you do is then you back up, you figure out what you truly have for revenue, and then to get back to zero, what services are you going to cut? And nobody wants to cut any services. So inflation directly, goes directly into services, and services cost more. You have a limited budget. You can't levy for more. So there's basically the only thing that can happen is either you're going to cut back on people, or you're going to cut back on services. And I do not envy the county executive or the two people sitting to my right here as they start going through the budget processes and how they're going to deal with that. So as a county board supervisor, we can recommend, and we're there as a check and balance for the county executive, but it's not an easy thing. Inflation is real.
Yeah, and I would just say too that City of Ripon is well into its 2023 budget, and just to give people some perspective of why local government funding is such an issue, we are often tied to net new construction, raising our levy to that number. The average community across the state over the last 5 years or so, I believe, has increased about 1.7% annually, so they can raise their levy about 1.7%. The City of Ripon's case, just this past year for 2023, we're at 0.64%, so we get an extra 20 grand to fund our budget. Last year it was at 0.46, I think the numbers just flipped. And that was $11,000 or so. At the same time, the state has increased their revenues in their budget by about 4% annually. They're taking in more money, but they aren't feeding it back down to municipalities. So the system is broken and needs to be fixed, and the only way it can be fixed is through state legislation. So communities have been backed into a corner at this point, where costs, this is the point of in time where this becomes a problem for municipalities. When the Consumer Price Index over the last year is 7.7%, that means things are up 7.7%. So just like everybody buys groceries or goes to the gas station, the cities and villages around here, everybody, local governments have to do the same thing. So those costs are up. As well as you talk about workforce, there is a mass exodus of public sector employees happening in the state of Wisconsin, not seen since Act 10 times. Mostly because of the silver tsunami and people retiring, as well as COVID and people being tired. And frankly, it's not very much fun to be a public sector worker at times with the environment we are in. So there's a lot of pressure for municipalities to pay more for employees. So you may have had a position that was being paid X amount of dollars, somebody retires, to replace that person, to just get an applicant pool of more than 4 people, you have to increase that salary by 20%. So all these pressures are happening all at this time. And in Ripon's case, fortunately for someone like me, coming into the community and having to budget, I have a completely different perspective and how you budget, how you use resources, and we're creatively getting some things done. But ultimately some of that, will continue to go away as those resources are used or reallocated, and we will be in a situation where it could be far more difficult than next year. So, you know, I don't want to get into specifics of what was or wasn't done in the past, but frankly, there are things you can do as a community. A lot of it does revolve around debt and use of other funds to help relieve pressure, but that is not a sustainable way to do things forever as well.
Thank you. Lori, would you like to add something?
Yes, budget season is the biggest reason, or the biggest project that a council member, and we are a 7-member at-large council. We are a council manager form of government in Oshkosh, so slightly different. We have a full-time city manager. My mayor's role is equal to other council members, except that I have the additional duties of running the meetings and making the appointments to the boards and commissions. But budget time is every year a challenge. This year especially, as Adam pointed out, the inflation costs. I want to specifically talk about not just the silver tsunami, which we're experiencing with retirements, but also the healthcare costs. We're looking at an 18% increase in our healthcare costs for our staff. And you know, as was pointed out, morale has been challenged over the last few years, trying to make do with less. And this will be an extremely tough year because there may not only be services and programming impacted, but building projects. And some of the inflation piece of this, with the cost of projects we're in the middle of, for example, we are very close to finishing our Riverwalk. We have several parks that are newly developing and in their early phases. And so is it a hit pause on new things, which then stifles growth and amenities and attraction? Do we hit pause so that we can maintain what we have? And one of the, I think, creative things that our council has considered, but it's taken 3 years to get to a point where we're even really truly getting into the detail on it, is how to repair our roads and our utilities in an equitable fashion. Currently, the city typically pays a third. Homeowners on each side of the street pay a third for street reconstruction and utilities. So we call that the special assessment. I'm not sure how you do it here in Ripon, but there have been several iterations of how that might be addressed. You know, there was the wheel tax consideration that didn't get passed. We had something called an ERU related to the pervious pavement. We're now in a third iteration, 3 years into this discussion, still no special assessment relief, talking about the trip generation model. And so whether it's a residence or a commercial, industrial, or civic property, that being distributed in equal monthly payments and added on to the stormwater bill. So it's still not an elegant solution, still not passed, and you know, many legal discussions about it, but forcing us to look at cutting things, services, and capital projects is certainly part of the discussion for budget this year.
And I'll just add like a real life example here in Ripon about that very, you know, project-based inflation cost. We are, you know, just finishing up building a senior activity center up in a park. I think when that project started, the overall cost was probably estimated to be 1.5 to 1.8 million. It ended up bidding out at $2.4 million. Thank goodness the federal government gave us some relief funds, and that helped pay for the project. If that wouldn't have happened, frankly, I don't know if that project would have been completed. In addition to that, you think of just basic things like an ambulance or a fire truck. Right now, if you were to try to buy a fire truck, good luck. You are waiting 3 to 4 years, and every quarter it's probably increasing by 5 to 10%, and that is real money. That is, you know, next month, beginning of next month, the fire truck from Pierce is up $75,000. That is no joke. That's a lot of money. And if you didn't order or get them in line, or you haven't ordered yet, you are waiting 3 to 5 years probably for just basic vehicles.
And prepaying, right?
Yeah, and prepaying, yeah, and or ordering without having a clue what it's going to cost you, because they can't guarantee pricing. So we had a special meeting just literally last week where we spent $190,000 to buy a plow truck off of a dealer lot because we needed to replace one. And if we didn't buy it, we would be waiting until 2025 to have a new plow truck. So that's the situation that's happening out there with local governments and just those kind of supply chain slash, inflation and cost things, just with basic things.
Yeah, I think all of the examples are really helpful and also eye-opening. I will just comment on one thing that was said earlier about workforce, again, challenges and maybe how to solve them. It seems to me that there's only so much that cities and counties can do. Yes, you can shuffle around people, but at some point it's like a zero-sum game. Some communities will win, some will lose. We haven't had major immigration reform in 4 decades. And a lot has changed since then, and if the two major parties can't agree to move forward with these kinds of reforms, somebody has to pay the price for it, and part of it goes to the local communities. So moving on, because of course there's a whole host of other issues. Let's talk a little bit about maybe something that's a little more uplifting, namely opportunities and things that maybe look quite promising. So my question to you would be, what are 2 opportunities that exist? Let me start with Fond du Lac County today. You can mention it sort of more broadly, or maybe mention a couple of specific projects that sort of look very good for the county.
Trying to pick specific projects. I know economic development in Fond du Lac County has not slowed down, basically, through any of this. So if you're looking for something that's kind of uplifting, business is booming. I mean, the businesses that are out there are doing well. The main streets are kind of coming back. The state had, I forget what they called it, but the Main Street built back, or it was $10,000 a storefront you could get. And so I think some of the main streets in Fond du Lac County have really taken advantage of that. I think Fond du Lac County is in the top couple in the entire state of counties that have taken advantage of that money. So it's a little bit uplifting to see that the businesses are doing well, but like you said, the challenge is the people. So, businesses are getting creative. They've figured out how to they're figuring out how to get more efficient. They're figuring out, what services the people are willing to pay for, right? And they're cutting out some of the fluff. And that's not fun, right? When you go someplace and a service you're used to getting, you just don't get anymore. So I do think that that's probably one of the brightest parts. Economic development in the state has increased an average of 1.5% per year for the last decade, meaning employment has gone up, I should say, 1.5%. I think the challenge, the flip side of that, is that new housing is only going up, I think it's about 0.5 or 0.6% with that. So, is there going to be a day of reckoning, I guess, when, that this economic development isn't sustainable? I don't know. But for the most part, I think it's so far it's held now. If we can fix the housing thing, that's, I guess, a different question we can maybe cover later. So.
If I may.
Yes, please.
Just reminded me, I had an opportunity to speak at UW-Oshkosh with a student environmental group last spring. And the title of my talk was, if you're interested in sustainability and saving the planet, stay in your parents' basement as long as you possibly can. And I was half serious. I actually have an adult son who is a basement dweller. He cooks, he pays rent, he helps with things that sometimes we aren't able to do. But seriously, folks, the intergenerational housing, I guess, model, if you will, it can seem a bit less private than sometimes we would like. But certainly, again, as we talk about the aging population and the needs there, and fewer caregivers who are paid $13 an hour when we might have been talking about $15 an hour wages for several years now, but in Oshkosh area, you really need to make $17 to $20 an hour to afford basic housing and assist sustaining. So I say that because the other opportunity that we are seeing in Oshkosh is we have actually the Fox Cities a large number of refugee folks folks with refugee background coming in. I had the opportunity to meet with 11 young men from Afghanistan recently, and through organizations like World Relief and others who are being welcoming and inclusive, we need to welcome folks in, because these are young men who have engineering degrees, who have been business owners, who are interpreters, and that very much mirrors what the Hmong community, which is our largest ethnic population in the Oshkosh area right now, experienced. And they have shown a path out of poverty through education, through home ownership, through business startups. And what I'm saying is, we need people. We need people. And how we welcome them makes a difference. And so I see that as a great opportunity in the Fox Cities.
I have to try to be positive. Really? Oh my goodness. All right, so positive things. So in the City of Ripon's case, I think, just the last year or so, we've planned out some projects and planned out some priorities that are really sort of bringing a new energy and I think a new vision to the entire community, whether that be the addition of the Senior Activity Center. We've done parks master planning, some facilities studying. We did a housing study as well. There's an investment in the downtown that we're doing with the Fond du Lac County aid that was provided. There continues to be good momentum in our downtown after a very difficult time, just before I got here, but just after I left as a college student. So I missed those years, thankfully. But that really has I think that story for Ripon's case in the downtown has been something we're really, is really positive, and we're building on, and there's a lot of good energy there. With new leadership in downtown organizations and new leadership at chamber organizations. There's a lot of new leadership in the entire community, from Ripon College to, I'm relatively new. So I think, all of those things, creating that vision, creating those opportunities, and really then getting buy-in and working toward implementation is really, really, really exciting. Because it's all with the goal to make this a more welcoming and inviting community. It's all with the goal of growing the community and addressing some long-standing challenges. So that makes me incredibly hopeful, and it's frankly an awesome part of my job to be involved in some of these initiatives and try to address some of the long-standing neglect or deficiencies that has occurred here. So that's good news. I'll end there.
Let me ask only one more question, because I know we want to get to questions from the audience. And the last question is more about giving me a little sense of how you make up your mind in terms of what are your own maybe priorities on certain issues. On many issues you cannot please everyone. So who do you feel most responsive to when it comes to forming and maybe defending your priorities and positions on issues? to what extent do you feel that you have discretion in governing, and how do you make sure that you have a good sense sort of for what is the pulse of the constituents and citizens? So how do you think about that part of politics? Maybe Lori?
So I would say by answering every email and every phone call, thousands of which over the last 6 years I've had that pleasure of responding to, and sometimes it's just 7 in the morning till sometimes after 10 at night, right? You get the pulse from hearing from folks what their struggles are, sometimes compliments, which is maybe a little more rare. We also, when we identify something based on what folks bring to us through emails or through, you get stopped in the grocery store and it's a small community. We also have our stakeholder groups, kind of those tried and true folks who weigh in on many things. We have our public participation plans. But really what it comes down to at the council level, what I have seen, at least in the last 6 years, most of the decisions that maybe change people's hearts and minds on the dais relate to those email campaigns where multiple folks are emailing and calling and showing up to me. So it's typically that personal connection, and that really does weigh on our council. The other piece of it is we do a citizen survey, and we work with a local university to do that citizen survey. And over the years, it was determined that we weren't really getting a good representation. And so a few years back, one of the professors and a couple of folks worked on expanding that reach. Over the years, cell phones have become more and more than the landlines. And so those online surveys have become more useful, as well as some of the distribution of that survey. So I would say that we use that along with that personal connection.
So my answer is going to be a little simpler. It was explained to me when I got on the county board 13 years ago. I represent about 4,000 people in Fond du Lac County, my district. As county board chair, I obviously represent the county at a little different level, but the basics of it, I represent 4,000. And one of the questions that was kind of brought up in my orientation was, and it tripped up probably 3/4 of the board that time, was when you vote for something, do you vote how you think people want you to vote? Or do you vote how you think you should vote? And then and basically that's the answer, right? You vote how you feel you should vote, what you think is right, and then the electorate will decide in 2 years or 4 years or whenever you're up. Because if you're just there to take a poll, you can do that anyway. We could vote as a county on everything, or as a town, and I think it's my job to cut through that as their representative and make those decisions. And if they're not popular, you'll quickly know you're going to be gone. It's not quite that simple, but that's kind of how I look at when I decide how I'm going to vote on something. I do what I think is right for the county, and the chips will fall where they fall, I guess. So.
If I were to say like social media or what's up Ripon, would that be good enough answer? Just how I make it? No, I can't. No. I'm a little unique in that I'm not an elected official. I'm an appointed official, and I serve an 8-person common council and the mayor of the city of Ripon. So, that's who, I work with, try to build consensus with, bring forward issues, and I'm kind of the liaison between the council and our staff that then executes the wishes or the actions of the council. So it's a little bit unique because I don't have to be elected, I don't have to win votes, I have to execute the direction the governing body and the community wants to take the community. At the same time though, I feel like I have one of the coolest, best jobs, at least in the state of Wisconsin. You know, in my profession is, I feel, one of the most important. Obviously, I have to say that, right? It's my job, but it's a unique profession that allows you to learn and touch and make impacts on very, very important things. So sometimes what's important is what's right in front of you, whether it's that email or that phone call. Sometimes it is, you know, you just see, or through my own experiences, you know that there's an issue here and you have to work with staff to dig into it, to provide a solution and bring that forward to the council. So, you know, I think really it's just a combination of all of that. And sometimes I get to like bring forward really cool ideas that I have, and that's really fun. Like, you know, sometimes they do cost money and I get told no, and that's fine, but at least we tried, and frankly it's with the intention of just trying to make a better community.
Yeah, thank you for all of your answers. I thought it was quite informative. And now I want to open it up to questions from you. You've been very patient, listening, and of course, I know when it comes to like challenges and problems, we could go on for quite some time here. Okay, just for the sake of it, I'll mention that famous slide that Adam put together here. Failing infrastructure, lack of growth, frozen revenue, public safety crisis, bumpy roads, lack of housing, employment retention and cost, inflation, lack of grants and other sources of money, politicizing local issues, and so on and so on. Now, what do you want to know? Questions? Gary.
With the issue of so-called worker shortage, I run into people all the time who are actually younger than me, who were released from their position because they were too old. Now, that's not the reason they were given, but we all know that was, they know and I know and other people know that was the reason why they were released. Where is this disconnect? There's a disconnect here somewhere. Is it because when you get to be too old, it costs an organization too much to maintain medical coverage for them? And if so, would it help if we had a national medical system?
So generally speaking, instances maybe of age discrimination that you are aware of?
So, you know, I guess I can try to take a stab at some of this. You know, just in the city of Ripon's case, we do sort of employment analytics. So we look at employees, how long, how long they've been with us, their tenure, to try to predict how many people that are going to be retiring in the next 5 years. We're going to have natural turnover of about 35% in the next 5 years, whether we're just based on retirements. That's a significant amount of our workforce. There just aren't the people applying. You know, the retirements, most people in the city of Ripon are retiring from their positions, and we have to replace them. Those employees have been with us a long time. We're actually paying people more to replace the people that have been in our organization for 30 plus years, just to get people, because the application pool is just it's so much more competitive. Local governments are not competitive when it comes to some of those things that people now want nowadays, like working from home or flexibility. So we have to get better at that. But I don't think in any case in any organization I've managed or something like that we've had age discrimination, or those are some of the most valuable employees to our organizations. frankly, we began just implementing digital and you know, systems and softwares to get information from those people, because when they leave, their entire experience and their entire knowledge leaves with it, and that is a scary, scary thing. So I don't think, you know, a lot of municipalities are pushing people out the door. I think it just comes a time where they're ready to go, and you need to prepare for that as an employer, whether that be investing in those, or as a city, whether investing in those tracking mechanisms or the, you know, systems that, or you know, becoming a more attractive employer for the next generation of workforce.
And maybe just to broaden Gary's question just a little bit, you know, I don't know if you're kind of familiar with other instances of discrimination in the public or private sector that really kind of maybe affect our workforce negatively, or even beyond discrimination, certain biases even where you see we need to do some more work as local communities, and even maybe even in the form of policies.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm obviously a little bit unique. I am an employer. I have almost 50 employees. I can tell you that I would never let anybody go because of age, because some of my best guys are what you would call senior. And so I'm not saying that problem doesn't exist, but from where I am, I don't see it. In fact, at our last county board meeting, we handed out some special recognitions to 4 people. And those 4 people totaled 176 years of service. It was mind-boggling the amount of knowledge that we lost in that short month of retirements. So, you know, I guess I can't say it's not happening. Are there instances? I'm sure there are. I think that they're going to be very industry or business specific, and I think when they pop up, I think they should get addressed. And you know, there are ways to deal with it. Maybe they're not sufficient. And if you're seeing those people, I think we need to take a little bit deeper dive into why that is, or what the special circumstances are.
And I'll just add, frankly, there's a whole wave of retirees coming back into the workforce to fill gaps. When we lost the finance director, we hired a retired individual that ran finance departments down in Illinois for decades. She was retired and came back into the workforce, and I think there's a ton of that happening where somebody retires, they take a break of service, and then they're back in, or they're going and working in consulting gigs. And supporting the lack of the needs of the employees, because or the needs of the employer, because there's openings. So you know, I've seen kind of the opposite.
All right, other questions? Steve.
Yeah, as somebody that teaches local government and is very involved in local government, I'd like your comments on taking this 18th century model that we have of cities and villages and towns and counties, and basically the 18th century boundary lines that we put. Is it time that we throw this model out and we start really looking at the present makeup of our populations? I mean, you talked about fire trucks. Well, we've got fire trucks that are 10 miles apart from each other that could have been serving the whole area, instead of everybody having their own fire trucks, having their own police departments, having their own. I mean, do you think that it's time to get rid of this model that was built when people, you know, rode horses back and forth instead of high-speed automobiles?
Yeah, what do you think? And more broadly speaking, right, how do we increase maybe efficiencies and working across cities, you know, across counties?
I'll just mention that we actually recently received a report. We'll be discussing soon. We got a preview of kind of a regional proposal in terms of like fire and EMS potential bringing together. And you know, currently, I think there is that kind of collective. You know, when there's a big event, right? maybe Ripon, Omro, Oshkosh, Neenah may come together. But this particular report that we got a sneak peek at that was discussing that very thing of kind of a regional emergency response system, and did not, interestingly, make that recommendation. I think because of the, again, the spreading so thin, and many of us are spreading thin of our staff and the aging of some of the vehicles and some of the equipment. So I appreciate that, because we want to continue to have that discussion about more of that regional collaboration. So at least we can have some data to work with before we go into that discussion.
I certainly can add, I think, how many cities and villages are there in the state of Wisconsin? Like 421 or something like that.
It's over 600.
Over 600, yes. Because every time in the past that you didn't like your neighbor, you just moved across the street and started your own village. I think that's what kind of happened in Wisconsin. We have more units of local government than just about any place on earth, which is a good thing. I mean, it does create local control. At the same time, we are very tribal or very boundary focused. It is hard sometimes to get along with our neighbors at times, because you are competing for people, resources. I think there was a very good op-ed done in the State Journal or Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, where there's really, at this point with municipal funding, Milwaukee and Tomahawk mayors both talked about how, what happens in Milwaukee doesn't benefit what's happening in Tomahawk, and there's, communities from a growth perspective are competing against each other. I mean, frankly, if something's happening good in Oshkosh, there may be some carryover from that in Ripon. At the same time, if there's a business that wants to relocate somewhere, that ties to our growth. I mean, the whole system is flawed, and it creates competition, and it creates this drive to basically, try to beat your neighbor. I mean, that is the honest truth. And then you get into conversations where, yeah, let's buy a fire truck. This has been used as an example over and over again in Ripon's community, because we have fire districts. And regional fire districts are great. The problem is they're not big enough. Ripon is 5 miles from Green Lake, and we have a $500,000 ladder truck or a $750,000 ladder truck. They have one. Brandon Fairwater has one. Oshkosh has one. Fond du Lac has one. It's insane, and there needs to be more regional collaboration. How you get there, it's tough. I mean, because there is a lot of distrust. There is a system in place, and I will just add too, in terms of like growth and development, our housing study too. Just taking, that old model of things from like a zoning perspective, just how you build houses, how big you build houses, how big of lots you have, how much that costs. It is all inefficient. It needs to be reworked, and communities need to start as well doing themselves their own favors by kind of updating things to make them a little bit more fitting to the times. So I think you brought up an incredible point, and I think communities locally can do little things to better address some old habits or old standards, but the bigger point of regionalization is it's a tough one. I mean, and I came from a very smaller, Ripon. I was in Hillsborough before, where very small compared to that. We had, communities, same thing. Every community of 1,400 or 900 people had its own school district. How many referendums have been passed over there? Tons, because people want to keep their own school district. So, short of some sort of incentive or forced consolidation, I don't know. But I'm certainly, from our perspective and our, basically our public service or public safety agencies like fire and EMS, that's where you're going to see the biggest opportunity to do that kind of stuff, because everybody needs to sort of offer that, and it's very expensive.
Good. I had a question on regional cooperation on my sheet. Thank you for ticking that one off, Steve. Other questions? We also love questions from students, or you guys can think about for a moment. No pressure, but we'll go to Joe at this point.
So I guess you guys kind of all talk about the financial challenges facing local governments. And Milwaukee's been in the news because it's kind of up against the financial cliff right now. How close are like some of the smaller municipalities to hitting that financial cliff? And I guess what is it going to take for the legislature to kind of distribute some more funds to our local governments?
That would require the legislature to meet and do their job.
Okay.
So I think from the standpoint, it's going to depend on where you are and what you've done lately and how you've prepared for this. There are communities that are really up against it. And I think it's going to take a couple brave communities to really make some tough decisions and cut some basic services, and or a group of municipalities doing that to gain the attention. I really feel that is where this is all headed. The other side of it is, you know, the first time an ambulance doesn't show up to a legislator's door when they call it. You know, maybe that's the trigger. I don't know. But I think you may see a few communities across the state pull the plug on some very important things, and maybe that will do it.
I think that financial cliff that you talked about, to me, is more about bonding. When communities start bonding for simple things, let's just say minor road construction or repairs to buildings, unusual things that should be covered with normal levy or, you know, other sources of funding, and eventually you're going to pay the piper, and that's when you hit that fiscal financial cliff. And when you see communities starting to do that, and you raise your eyebrows, because that is not healthy for any kind of government to start heavily bonding. And luckily, Fond du Lac County's not there, not even close. So we do bond for things, but we're very healthy. And are some of these other cities, you know, when they go all in and they start financing some mega projects, you know, that's where I think some of these counties and cities can get in trouble. So it's just my 2 cents.
Good, thank you. Other questions? Betty?
This is for Steve, but anyone can answer. Not living in the city of Oshkosh, not living within the municipal boundaries of Ripon, but out in a rural address, only 2 miles from Ripon. How do you at the county level get your input from, say, like Township of Ripon, Town of Rosendale, Town of El Dorado, these other areas? How do you get your concerns and interests, and how do you respond to them?
So my specific instance, I'll pick mine because you asked me. So I represent, for the most part, the town of Forest and the town of Empire. And I literally probably know a fair number of people. You know, I can't say percentage, but I bet you I know 20% personally, the people that live in those districts. So people getting in touch with me and telling me what their concerns aren't that difficult. Now, for somebody, let's just say, we'll say Sam Kaufman or any county executive, that's a little different, right? So if you were in my district and you had a concern that you thought I could address, I would strongly encourage you to either call me, email me, find me at the gas station, talk to me, and we have that conversation. County executive, a little bit different. You're going to have to probably get in his grill a little bit and email and just stay on, right? And to get your concerns heard. Squeaky hinge, you know, that is true. So I think every circumstance is a little bit different, but in mine, I'd say it's not as difficult for me to rub elbows with my constituents as you might think.
Is there a plan for all of Fond du Lac County that outlines these channels that you're referring to from your local, say from my local board supervisor?
Sure.
I won't mention any names, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's so
How
if there,
effective is that communication channel?
so I guess it depends, depends on the individual if you think it's effective or not. From my point of view, I mean, I've never had anybody tell me that they couldn't get a hold of me or, you know, I guess, is there an exact plan? I can't say that there's a, you know, we're gonna give you a card that says, here's how you get a hold of your representatives. I think that's up to the individual, and they need to seek out those people. And I'll be honest with you, some of our county board members probably aren't as good with email as they should. Maybe some don't respond to phone calls. I guess it's going to be on an individual basis. So I think you kind of need to figure out what works for your representative. I don't know
Or
if that
what
answers-
works for that citizen?
Exactly. Yeah. And some people don't have internet, right?
Right.
And some people don't have a cell phone. And in those cases, I strongly suggest people go to committee meetings that their elected officials serve on and talk to them. That's their opportunity, really, to get in a public forum. I wouldn't say take it to the county board because we don't allow public comment as a normal part of doing business with the county board. We encourage those things to happen at the committee level. So, but any person can go to any committee meeting and get on the agenda and they're allowed to speak.
Well, I
to
will
that
compliment the Township of Ripon, what you just said, having attended for several years and monthly meetings of the town of Ripon. And Gary and I, and I don't know if anyone else is here, and our town chairman would say, Betty, what do you have for us to talk about tonight? So being personal does have its advantages.
Sure.
We do have time for one or two more questions before we leave. I would love to have a question from students. Again, no pressure, but is there anybody? Okay, we have, oh yeah, there's a question right here.
So there are young people on both sides of the political aisle that are really passionate about a lot of issues at the national level and things that impact the world. But what are some ways that young people like us in the room can get started in local government and be able to talk about the issues that concern us?
Move to Oshkosh, run for council. I'd just like to say that we did come up with a program. The second year I was mayor in 2020, just before the pandemic and the shutdown, we had added a youth ex officio two for each of our boards and commissions. They would be non-voting, but they could participate and contribute to our boards and commissions. We have like 23 boards and commissions, but certainly, I mean, young people are, I will say, on our city council, when I would say within the second term I was on council, our age actually started decreasing in our council makeup by about a generation a year, it seems like, to the point that now we have, quite a range, but certainly run for office, run for county board. One of our current council members is in his mid-20s, and he first served when he was in college on the county board. So absolutely, do it.
So I'll tell you a little story. I worked a college student from 2004 to 2008. And I was going to be a teacher. Like, that was kind of where I was headed. And then one of my academic advisors was like, oh, and my junior year said, it's just a funny story. It's Andy Kirkmeyer, great guy, passed away. He literally comes to our senior seminar one day and is like, good luck ever getting a job. You're going to be one of 150 applicants for any teaching job, and how are you going to differentiate yourself? And I said, well, I'm out. I'm not. I was a junior, but what am I going to do? So my senior year, I kind of reevaluated, and I'm like, I had a kind of passion for local government, mostly from my upbringing. My dad was a town chairman. My mom was a school board president in Sheboygan, and so I had that in me, and I literally one day just reached out to the city administrator in Ripon and shadowed him for a day. So I certainly would offer that. The city has also created an internship program for Ripon College and Ripon College students only. So we're hosting our first intern now. That program will continue, but I certainly would also offer, an inside look from any student into my job, as well as any operation that we're doing, whether, environmental sciences and like wastewater treatment plants. Because if you would have told me 10 years ago, 12 years ago, no, 15 years ago, I've been out that long, holy crap, that I would be the city administrator in Ripon. I'd be in the exact office that I went to go visit the administrator in my senior year of college, and I'd be the administrator. No way that would happen. But dreams do come true, and here I am. So I certainly would open, any of our departments up to continue expansion of intern programs, and certainly just shadowing and seeing kind of what we do, whether that's a tour of a wastewater treatment plant or looking at a public works situation or project. So beyond that, I think certainly we have representatives. I think Ripon College students have ran in the past. I don't know how successful we've been at getting on city council in Ripon, but we do have boards, commissions, things of that. So maybe not here, but once you graduate and you establish yourself in a community, it may be intimidating to run for council. So hey, there's like plan commission, right? Or there's library board, or there's, it takes more than just a common council to run a city. And it takes more than just staff. There are citizen volunteers and citizen committee members. I believe in the city of Ripon, with the council, it takes an additional 54 people to serve on committees and commissions to get the work done. So there are opportunities to do that. Don't be afraid to engage, your elected council members and mayor to when you're in that community, as well as reach out to people like my role or an administrator and say, hey, I'm interested. I would love, I want to serve on this committee, because that maybe springboard you into, more of that elected public service.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful question about involvement in local government, and I want to give credit to Adam Sontag, who really established this management internship program, and put together the paperwork, but also the whole process. And we've already had quite a few students who expressed in this program, and from what I hear, it's going well. And so I'm really glad that we don't just talk about town-gown relationships, but here's an example of how we can really make things happen, and I think we have a good communication line.
It's paid too.
It's paid, yeah, that's good to mention that too. Also, and again, I will mention that to our students, we have other alumni who went a very similar path, just like Adam here, getting a master's degree in public administration, and we have one who is very eager and has lots of great resources and would love to kind of take sort of future alumni under her wing. So plus just feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to make some connections. Yeah, sure.
So I'd actually like to ask a question of the audience to two demographics here. So for our young people, what would it take to be attractive as an employer? Is it bring your dog to work, come in the pajamas? I don't want to be like stereotyping or anything, but I'm listening to my 16-and-a-half-year-old granddaughter who says, that they really need at school, what would really be awesome is if we had comfy chairs. So give those suggestions. What are you looking for in an employer? What would it take for you to perform and be interested in being part of local government or working for a city or a town or a county? And then the same question for the retired folks, the mature folks. What would it take to pull you back out of retirement? Is it a flex schedule? Is it a part-time schedule? Is it on demand? Is it floater? What creature comforts could we lure you back with? So if anybody would be willing to share, I'd love to hear.
Comfortable chair.
Christina.
So I actually interviewed with Adam this summer, so I think for like that role specifically too, like a big part of like that job, and we talked about it too, was that they were very big on making the interns not just feel like the paper boy who's running things around with filing papers and shredding things and bringing people coffee, and being able to actually fully engage in that role, and like being able to bring up our own ideas of programs and being able to actually go into different things and getting a very in-depth look throughout the internship rather than just having the title but being just kind of like a clerk for them. So I think having opportunities like that where there is more than, because it is very competitive for young people now, and even like I'm going to law school and seeing the competitive nature and even get a good score on the LSAT and be competitive for bigger schools now, it's just gotten so much harder over the years. So having entry-level jobs like that, like internships that are going to not only give you like, the title and be able to have that position, but having a lot of opportunities for direct advancement within them so that we feel that we're more prepared for what direction we want to go, and also being able to go into other job interviews, like when we go after graduate school to get our career, being able to say this is exactly what I did in this program, and I can give you a really strong reference, and they can like vouch for how much work I actually did in an office, and I have something I can really show for it that's related directly to this field.
So meaning and engagement, not just resume builder.
Yeah.
And John.
Probably closer in age to most of the students than most of the faculty are. I'm only 30 years old. My general understanding from what they tell me, my own experience, is money, because we can't afford anything, but obviously we can't get more money. So I would say the second priority would be sense of meaning, which I think is what Christina's getting at. Like a lot of people sign up for internships and they do just do paper boy, paper girl. And I think a lot of them do want that I matter, I'm actually having an impact at my job. So a little bit of a micromanagement thing that I probably know.
Can I tag on to that too?
Yes, Becky.
One other thing, speaking of internships and jobs, I know students at universities and business programs and accounting usually do internships somewhere and are often hired by the place they got the internship. How about maybe some local government internships that lead to job offers directly out of college?
I think there was one more hand. Oh yeah, Gary.
All right, speaking as someone who is at least of retirement age, if you wanted to get me to really want to get back into the workforce, you have to be as, for me, you would have to be as interesting as school was, and as interesting as things that I can do outside of work now.
Fair enough.
I mean, I'm not necessarily saying it should be that way.
So we usually end our events roughly 75 minutes into it. This is where we are. Unless there's one last burning question that can be answered shortly, I don't want to have anybody leave and says, dang it, I didn't get to ask this one thing I wanted to know. Looks like we are okay. I want to, first of all, thank our panelists for making it here today and for giving us really sort of helpful, thoughtful answers and some great food for thought. So let's give it up for our panelists. I also want to thank Ripon Channel for recording the event, and of course I really want to thank you for showing serious interest in local matters, I hope you will join us for more discussions and for more events. And I thought it was great what Lori did here at the end, turning the tables a little bit. It's sort of a great, maybe great little lesson also for other events. The next event will be October 18th, the U.S. Indigenous Right to Vote. Challenges today reflect those of the past. We will have two very experienced speakers who will talk about those strategies and how to expand the U.S. Indigenous right to vote, and they will put them into historical context. Even if you are very familiar with many policy issues and you really care about politics, I can guarantee you you will get some really interesting new perspectives that you have never thought of. So that'll be kind of exciting. So this will be October 18th, 6:30 p.m., same location. So we hope to see you then, and thanks again for coming, and have a good night.